breaking illusions to reveal true inner power. Funny thing, isn't it? People spend their whole lives decorating their cages, polishing the bars, convincing themselves they're free while tiptoeing around the same patterns, the same fears, the same rules everyone else follows without question. Illusions aren't just shiny tricks or smoke in the air. They're the stories people swallow because they're easier than the truth. And the truth. Oh, that's the part that keeps them up at night. That's the part they'd rather bury under routines, responsibilities, and whatever cheap distraction keeps their minds quiet. But you did something different. You actually stopped and stared into the cracks. You noticed the little glitches in the game, those faint whispers telling you something wasn't adding up. Most people hear those whispers and run the other way. You leaned in closer. See, illusions don't break gently. They don't shatter in a poetic way. They crumble like rotten wood, and when they do, you get to see what's been crawling underneath the whole time. The moment you realize the world wasn't this neat little snow globe everyone pretends it is, things started to shift. The lines between the possible and the impossible blurred. Suddenly, the things you were told to fear didn't seem so big, and the things you were told to ignore became impossible to look away from. That's when your inner power wasn't just some vague idea. It was a presence, something alive, something waiting for you to acknowledge it. People like to act like stepping into your real power is some calm, majestic awakening. No, it's messy, it's loud, it's uncomfortable. Because to tap into something real, you have to peel off everything fake. You have to admit the masks you wore weren't yours. You have to accept that the rules you followed weren't written for your benefit. You have to recognize that the limits you believed in were me-downs from people who never bothered testing them. Once you see that, once you let the illusion collapse, there's no going back. And that's what scares most people. They want power without the price. They want truth without the terror. They want freedom without confronting the chains they've grown used to. But you didn't flinch. You walked straight into the fire of your own awareness. You let the lies burn off. You let the fake world fall apart piece by piece. And in that chaos, in that unsettling silence that follows the destruction of everything familiar, you found something solid. Yourself. Not the version people expected. Not the polite version designed to fit in. But the version that sees the world as it is and sees through it. The version that understands power isn't taken or given. It's remembered. It's reclaimed. It's awakened. Breaking illusions isn't about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's about seeing the machinery behind the curtain and realizing you were never meant to be part of it. It's about recognizing that your perception was the real battlefield all along. The moment you cracked open that first illusion, the rest trembled. Every belief you questioned loosened another lock. Every truth you uncovered lit another corner of the room. And the entities, those little forces that thrive in confusion, in fear, in illusion, they noticed. They felt the shift. They sensed someone waking up where everyone else stayed asleep. They realized you weren't playing their game anymore. They realized you were starting to see them clearly. And nothing terrifies them more, turning fear into fuel for transformation. Now that's a delicious little trick most people never figure out. They treat fear like it's some kind of venom. Like the moment it touches their skin, they're supposed to freeze, hide, curl up into a neat little ball. They avoid it, deny it, pretend it isn't there. But fear isn't the enemy. It's the spark. It's the trembling voice that tells you exactly where the real doorway is. The problem is, people are so busy running from it that they never stop to realize fear was pointing them in the right direction the whole time. You didn't run, though. You stared it down, and that's when everything started to change. Fear has this funny habit of exposing the truth faster than anything else. It strips away the polite explanations, the fake smiles, the stories you tell yourself to stay comfortable. When fear hits, the mask slips right off. Most people hate that feeling. They think it means something's wrong. But you understood something most never will. Fear is just the body's way of saying, pay attention. Something important is happening. It's the drumbeat before the breakthrough. It's the electricity before the storm. You listen to that pulse instead of silencing it, and that's how you manage to turn it into power. Transformation doesn't start with courage. It starts with fear, raw, inconvenient, unavoidable fear, because fear digs up the things you've buried. It drags your shadows into the light. It forces you to confront the thoughts you'd rather keep locked away. And in that confrontation, something shifts. Something old cracks open, and something new slips through. You don't transform in quiet moments. You transform in the tension, the pressure, the edge where fear pushes you hard enough to move. That's where you found your strength, not by pretending you were fearless, but by refusing to let fear decide your limits. You see, fear is energy. People forget that. They treat it like poison instead of power. But the moment you stopped fighting it, the moment you let it surge through you instead of shutting it out, fear became fuel. It sharpened your senses. It made your mind clearer. It pushed you past the point where ordinary people quit. It gave you the fire to break old patterns and tear apart the doubts that used to hold you in place. Fear is a wild thing, and wild things can't be tamed, only ridden. You learn to ride it right into your awakening. Most people stay stuck because they interpret fear as a stop sign. You saw it as a signal flare, a neon arrow flashing. This way. You realized the parts of yourself that scared you the most were the ones carrying the power you'd been avoiding. Fear wasn't showing you danger. It was showing you where you were asleep, where you were hiding, where you were still small. And once you understood that, fear lost its teeth. It stopped being a monster and became momentum. And let's not forget what happens to the entities, the little shadows lurking around people who are controlled by fear. They feast on hesitation, on doubt, on that trembling space between wanting to move and being too scared to try. But the moment you started using your fear, instead of being used by it, those things couldn't hold on anymore. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't back down when the ground shakes. Someone who turns every shock into strength. Someone who walks straight into the places everyone else avoids because they think it's too much or too dangerous. You became unpredictable to them, unmanageable, untouchable. Fear became your engine, your compass, your ignition switch. While the rest of the world tiptoes and trembles, you walk right through the fire they warned you about, and the flames don't burn you, they reveal you. Mastering the locked planet mindset, now that's where things really start to twist. See, most people go through life believing the world is this big open playground, full of endless choices and shiny possibilities. They think they're free just because no one's physically holding their hand or dragging them by the collar. But freedom isn't about open doors. It's about knowing which ones were never open in the first place. This planet, oh, it's a master illusionist. It looks wide and limitless, but underneath the surface it's one giant lockbox, sealed tight with expectations, fear, routine, and the invisible chains people don't want to admit they're wearing. But you saw the bolt. You heard the click. You noticed the whole thing was one big clever trap disguised as normal life. The locked planet mindset isn't something people choose. It's something they inherit. It's spoon-fed to them before they even realize they have a choice. Do this, don't do that. Be good, follow the rules. Don't ask questions. Fit and behave. Every little instruction tightens the lock, wraps another loop around their mind. Eventually, they stop noticing the restrictions altogether. They think the walls are just part of the scenery. They call it reality. They call it how things are. And once someone buys that story, they don't even try the door handle anymore. They assume it's locked, so they never check. That's the real trick. That's how the planet keeps everyone nice and orderly. But you didn't buy the story. You saw the cracks in the script. You questioned the lines everyone else recited without thinking. You realized the lock wasn't some cosmic punishment. It was a design, and every design can be undone. That's what mastery is. Recognizing the cage while everyone else praises the decor. Seeing the strings while everyone else applauds the puppet show. The moment you understood that the restrictions weren't real, they started to lose their power. The lock only works when you believe the door can't open. The moment doubt slipped in, real doubt, powerful doubt, the gears started to loosen. Most people think breaking free requires brute force. No, it's much simpler. It's about understanding the psychology of the prison. Once you recognize that the world traps people with beliefs, not bars, You stop trying to punch your way out and start rewiring your perception instead. That's what you did. You stopped accepting the ruleless as truths. You stopped treating fear as a boundary. You stopped bowing to invisible limits. And once the mental lock breaks, the physical world starts bending around it. Doors you thought were sealed suddenly swing wide open. Opportunities appear where you were told none existed. The whole structure starts to feel flimsy, like you could push one finger through the walls and watch the whole thing collapse. And the funniest part, once you master the locked planet mindset, you start noticing how uncomfortable it makes certain forces. The ones who benefit from everyone staying obedient. The ones who don't want anyone peeking behind the curtain. They rely on people believing the world is fixed, rigid, unchangeable. So when someone like you, someone who isn't fooled, starts moving through life like the lock was never real, those entities begin to panic. Not because you're dangerous in the big scary monster way, but because you're unpredictable. You're not operating by the rules they wrote. You're not thinking inside the boundaries they crafted. You're not reacting to their intimidation or their ideas of control. Once you understand the planet's lock, you start turning it against itself. You become fluent in the language of constraint, which means you can slip through its gaps, its blind spots, its contradictions. You start noticing how easy it is to crack a system that depends on people not paying attention. And that's when it hits you. The planet was never locked because it had to be. It was locked because people agreed to it. They signed the invisible contract without reading the fine print. But you tore it up the moment you realized your mind was the only real key. Awakening shamanic awareness in modern chaos. Now that's a spectacle worth watching. People like to think we're living in this clean, polished world of logic and schedules, where everything is predictable if you just follow the steps. They forget that underneath the skyscrapers, the deadlines, the glowing screens and the noise, there's something ancient still humming. Something older than all these systems piled on top of it. Most people can't hear it anymore. Too distracted, too domesticated, too convinced that the only things that matter are the ones they can measure by or post online. But you tuned in. You caught the whisper through all the static, and that's when things started getting interesting. Shamanic awareness doesn't wake up politely. It doesn't come tapping on your shoulder, asking if now is a good time. It crashes in, it disrupts, it flips the table neatly set with all your little expectations. Because true awareness doesn't fit in a modern box. It doesn't care about comfort. It doesn't care about convenience. It rises like a surge from someplace deep beneath your ribs, from the dirt, from the dark, from the parts of yourself you weren't taught to explore. It's wild, unreasonable, untamable. And that's why most people never even get close to it. They're too scared to listen to anything that doesn't come with a label or an instruction manual. You felt that pull, though, that eerie sense that there's more happening around you than anyone bothered to explain. Modern chaos isn't just noise. It's a disguise, a distraction tactic. If people stay busy enough, scared enough, overwhelmed enough, they'll never notice the unseen currents running underneath everything. You noticed them. You started tracking the patterns that no one else saw. The moments of DAG view that didn't feel accidental. The dreams that felt too sharp. The sensations that didn't fit inside the world everyone else insisted was normal. Those were the cracks. The places where the ancient world bleeds into the modern one. And you step through them without hesitation. Awakening that awareness, it changes how you see everything. Suddenly, the little signs people ignore become clues. The tension in the air becomes a message. The shadows in the corner of your vision feel alive, not in a spooky story kind of way, but in a "you're finally paying attention" way. You start realizing that intuition isn't some mystical fluff, it's a navigation system. Your senses sharpen. Your instincts stop whispering and start roaring. You stop trying to make the world fit into the neat explanations you were handed, and instead you start letting the world reveal itself on its own strange terms. And here's the part that really shakes things up when that ancient awareness comes back online. Modern chaos doesn't scare you anymore. While everyone else is scrambling, overwhelmed by pressure and noise, you start moving with a different rhythm. You can see through the confusion like it's smoke. You sense the currents underneath the madness. Chaos becomes a language, not a threat. It becomes something you can read, navigate, even predict. And nothing unsettles the forces hiding in it more than someone who knows how to walk through the storm without losing their balance. The entities that thrive on confusion, on people staying spiritually blind. They don't expect someone to wake up like you did. They don't expect someone to feel the vibrations hidden behind the noise. They don't expect someone to hear the things that aren't spoken. You bypassed the distractions. You tuned into the frequency they never wanted anyone to access. That's why they start backing up when you enter the scene. Not because you're swinging swords or chanting spells, but because you're aware, truly aware, awake in a world that depends on people staying asleep. Modern chaos is the perfect camouflage, but you ripped the camouflage right off. You saw the ancient roots under the concrete. You felt the old power stirring behind the curtain of everyday life. And once you awaken that kind of awareness, you can't be missiled by cheap illusions. You stop reacting. You start perceiving. You stop getting pulled into the madness. You learn to navigate it like someone who's been here before, even if you don't remember how you learned it. Disrupting hidden forces with personal clarity. Now that's where the real fun begins. Most people move through life like they're walking through fog, squinting, guessing, bumping into things they don't understand. They feel pushed around by moods that aren't theirs, thoughts that don't belong to them, pressure they can't explain. And instead of questioning it, they shrug and say, "That's just life." They never stop to consider that maybe the fog is deliberate. Maybe it's been laid down thick on purpose. Hidden forces don't need chains when confusion does the job. They thrive on fog. They count on it. But that's where you broke the script. You decided to see clearly. Clarity isn't calm and peaceful like people imagine. No, real clarity is harsh. It's bright. It burns away the nonsense like sunlight on a vampire. It makes the patterns obvious, the manipulations laughably thin, the false beliefs crack under their own weight. Clarity doesn't arrive with soft music. It hits like a spotlight you didn't ask for. And once it hits, you can't unsee anything. That's what happened to you. You stopped accepting vague feelings, stopped swallowing convenient explanations, stopped letting the world tell you what was normal. You took a step back and looked at everything with those sharp, unsettling eyes of yours, and suddenly the shadows weren't shadows anymore. They were shapes, movements, intentions. Hidden forces aren't always supernatural. Sometimes they're cultural scripts, old wounds, unconscious habits, invisible expectations whispering in your ear. Sometimes they're external, sometimes internal, sometimes both tangled together like wires behind a wall. But whatever they are, they lose their power the moment someone sees them clearly. Hidden things can only influence people who don't look too closely. And you looked hard. You noticed the subtle nudges, the sudden doubts that appeared out of nowhere, the emotional swings that didn't match the moment, the heavy thoughts that felt like they were dropped into your head from somewhere else. You traced them back. You questioned them. You dissected them. And in doing so, you cut their strings. Clarity is a rebellion all on its own. It's dangerous because it strips away every excuse. Once you see what's actually controlling people, fear, shame, manipulation, distraction, those forces can't latch onto you the same way. You become slippery, unpredictable, inconvenient. You stop reacting on autopilot. You stop getting hooked by bait. You stop dancing when they pull the same old levers. Instead of being moved, you start observing. Instead of being intimidated, you start analyzing. And the moment you stop playing the role they assigned you, you become a wild card. The entities, whether they're psychological ghosts or real unseen observers, hate wild cards. They hate anyone who steps off the predictable path. They're used to people flinching when they push, bowing when they whisper, breaking when they apply a little pressure. But clarity ruins their entire playbook. It shines a light under the bed and shows there's nothing there but dust and old stories. It reveals that half of the fear was theater, half the pressure was illusion, half the rulers were made up. And once you see that, their tricks lose their glamour. Their influence shrivels. You didn't disrupt these forces with violence or confrontation. You did it with awareness sharp enough to slice through pretense. You did it by knowing yourself so well that nothing external could hijack your emotions without you noticing. You did it by cleaning your inner world until there were no dark corners left for anything to hide in. That's the kind of clarity that rattles them, because clarity creates sovereignty, and sovereignty, real sovereignty, is the one thing those hidden forces can't touch. When your mind stops being a battlefield, the forces that fed on confusion lose their territory. When you claim your focus, your narrative, your perception, you uproot their influence like ripping weeds from the ground. You started seeing the world with unfiltered eyes, and suddenly every trick, every trap, every lie stood there naked and exposed. And once you've seen through something, you can't be controlled by it, becoming the threat that once threatened you. Oh, that's the twist nobody expects. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid the things that scare them. They tiptoe around their own shadows, shivering at memories running from echoes. They treat their fears like they're made of steel and treat themselves like glass. But fear is only powerful as long as you stay small. The moment you grow into the size of what scares you, the whole dynamic flips. Suddenly, the monster isn't towering over you. You're eye level, maybe even taller. And that's when everything starts trembling on the other side. People often imagine growth as this gentle rise, this soft evolution. But becoming a threat, that's a different kind of transformation. It doesn't come from comfort. It comes from pressure, from being pushed against walls you didn't choose, from surviving things that were meant to break you. You don't become dangerous by accident. You become dangerous because you were forced to shed every illusion of weakness. The things that once haunted you taught you exactly where your fractures were, exactly where your strength needed to grow. You learned their patterns, their tricks, their rhythm. Without even realizing it, you were studying your enemy, and in studying it, you began to match it, then surpass it. The irony is, the forces that tried to intimidate you actually trained you. They sharpened you. They revealed the raw edges you didn't know you had. Every doubt they tried to plant became a reason for you to dig deeper. Every fear they threw at you became fuel. Every moment of feeling powerless became a blueprint of how power actually works. You learned what fear feels like from the inside, which means you learned how to break it. Not just in yourself, anywhere you see it. That's when you stop being prey. You stop being a target. You stop being a vulnerable soul, walking around hoping nothing dark notices you. You become something the dark tries not to notice. Becoming the threat doesn't mean becoming cruel or destructive. It means becoming undeniable. It means your presence carries weight. It means your energy doesn't bow, doesn't shrink, doesn't apologize. It means everything that once made you flinch now flinches at you. The entities, whatever shape they take, are used to feeding on uncertainty, insecurity, hesitation. But once those things evaporate, once you replace them with clarity and intention, the entire power structure rearranges itself. You're no longer reacting to them, they're reacting to you. That's what happens when you step into the version of yourself they hoped you'd never meet. You turn into something that can't be manipulated with the same old strings. Your mind becomes too sharp, your instincts too awake, your intuition too loud to ignore. You start seeing threats before they form. You start sensing lies before they're spoken. You start walking into situations with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's already wrestled with the worst inside themselves and won. That calm is terrifying to forces that rely on chaos. That self-possession is a weapon. And the funniest part, you don't even have to fight. Your awareness alone becomes a barricade. Your confidence becomes a warning. Your presence becomes a message, loud and clear. I'm not the one you can play with. The same forces that once circled you now keep their distance. They feel the shift, the density of someone who knows who they are. Someone who isn't moved by tricks or shadows or old fears dressed in new costumes. Someone who walked through the fire and came out carrying the flame instead of the burn. People think being a threat means being loud, aggressive, explosive. But real power is quieter. It's in the way you look at the world without blinking. It's in the way you speak without trembling. It's in the way you hold your ground even when everything tries to push you off it. You turn the tables by becoming the version of yourself none of your fears planned for. And when you embody that kind of energy, Even the things that once scared you start to retreat, recognizing that the hunter has changed roles.